Hi guys. In my presentation, I'm going to be talking about COVID-19 and how it's affected our community in the past couple years and how a lot of people stand divided on certain issues within COVID-19. So, to get started, COVID-19, it's been a major issue that's affected our community and the world at large ever since the first case was reported um, in January of 2020. And the first case in the US was actually reported in March of 2020, whereas the first case in the world was reported in January of 2020, which was in China. Um, but the main issue that I would like to discuss occurring within the problem of COVID 19 is the anti masking and anti vaxxing epidemic and how it is still contributing to rising cases of the virus itself. Um, as COVID 19 has been an issue for 3 years now, there have been many guidelines and safety rules put into place to ensure that the number of cases do not spread in order to keep the public safe. And according to the CDC website, some of the guidelines that were put into place, they include quarantine and mask regulation in public spaces, restrictions on air traveling, and the 6 feet apart spacing rule, as well as the they closed down numerous public spaces like businesses, schools, restaurants, and other social gathering events. Those were also put on hold at the time. And according to the CDC COVID 19 timeline, um, the 15th of March of 2020 is when U.S. states began essentially just shutting down everything and isolating people into their own homes to ensure that the spread could be contained to a minimum. Um, but unfortunately, public businesses began to open back up within the same year, as well as people kind of ignoring these rules and going back outside, sometimes even without masks. Um, but along with this, the general public tends to stay divided on this issue of the virus itself and the safety guidelines put in place to ensure that the virus does not spread. And the article examining the left right divide through the lens of a global crisis, ideological differences, and their implications for response to the COVID 19 pandemic is something that touches upon the way in which America is divided on this issue of the pandemic and their views on it. Um, it also goes into a lot of detail and states how political beliefs sometimes seem to interfere with the attitude towards the virus. Um, One of the things that the article goes into detail about and explains is the fact that people on the left side and of the political spectrum tend to be more worried about the pandemic in contrast to people who identify more on the political right of the spectrum who believe that there's nothing to worry about concerning the pandemic. Now, that's not to say that everybody who identifies on the right side of the political spectrum has more lenient beliefs towards COVID as a whole, but the argument that this article is trying to support and the evidence that they have found in multiple studies have shown that most people who identify on the right side of the political spectrum do tend to have these more lenient beliefs towards the pandemic and the safety guidelines around it. So, the article does go to show how ideologic divides in these specific safety measures and with the virus itself has helped to contribute to the rising numbers of the cases for the virus. Following these divided responses to the pandemic, not only has this created tensions between citizens of the U.S., but it has also endangered the lives of millions, as some of these viewpoints can come to be considered harmful. Um, so, although I haven't really necessarily specified what these opinions and viewpoints may be, I'm sure a lot of people already have an idea of what I'm referencing to. Um, but to clearly state it, the main issues that I'm speaking on behalf of are the anti-vaccine movement and the anti-masking movement. But the anti-vaccine movement in itself is mostly supported by the theory that the COVID-19 vaccinations, such as the Moderna, the Pfizer, and the Johnson & Johnson, are not actually safe. And the article dispelling anti-vaxxer misinformation about COVID-19 vaccination speaks to this issue a bit more and reveals the truth and misinformation behind this belief. Um, Along with this, the anti-masking movement is something that is also a very harmful problem. And I'm sure that everybody has encountered this problem at least once since the pandemic started. Whether it was someone refusing to wear their mask in a grocery store, or maybe somebody that was told to leave a restaurant because they refused to wear a mask inside. We've all probably dealt with these types of encounters before, and one article that specifies and speaks to this problem is the association between COVID-19 outcomes and mask mandates, adherence, and attitudes. But basically, this article goes against the anti-mask mentality as it argues that mask mandates have statistic evidence in the decrease of COVID-19 cases as a whole. And although it has been 3 years later, the number of vaccinated individuals continues to rise, but COVID-19 is still an ever-present issue, definitely lurking in the back of people's minds, and the spread of misinformation still continues, but opposite sides of the arguments do go to correct some of these false statements in an attempt to spread the truth and keep others safe. Although COVID-19 is an unforgivable virus that acts all on its own, our response and our very actions contribute to some of the root causes behind its constant spread. And it is still certainly an issue that still needs to be considered as people attempt to continue to live a semi-regular life. Even if cases have begun to decline in the recent months and mask mandates are still being lifted, we should still proceed with caution as COVID-19 still does very much exist. In the end, it's really up to us and our actions to ensure the safety of each other.